Good afternoon, everybody. It is Thursday in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. My name is Adam Bittner, digital sports producer for the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, back with Paul Zeise for our weekly Zeise is Right video. Paul, how are you?
I'm doing good. How are you doing?
It's another week, another load of headlines for us to dig through, Paul. And maybe getting to be summertime, but there's still plenty of stuff to talk about. First things first, I wanted to get into the Alex Highsmith extension. He addressed the question of whether he's, how he feels about extending his deal with the Steelers, kind of being TJ Watt's running mate for the remainder of, however long. And he seems quite hopeful that there's going to be a deal. The Steelers seem pretty hopeful that there's going to be a deal. Paul, do you think that's the right move for both sides to make sure he's locked up, given his production here on the other side of TJ Watt?
Well, first of all, I don't know that I can recall a player ever saying, you know what, I don't want an extension. I want to get the hell out of here. So it doesn't surprise me that he would say, yeah, I want to be a Steeler for life. And I think that it could be the right move. I don't know that I would give it to him right now. I would wait till after the season to see what his production is. And I also think that when you think about how much money they're putting on that side of the ball, eventually into a year or 2 years, they're going to have to sign their quarterback probably. And if he's who they think that he's going to be, you know what? What did Daniel Jones get this year? $40 million? I think that's what he got, $40 million a year, something like that. So if Kenny Pickett is just good, the baseline contract is going to be $40 million a year. If he's just good, he doesn't even have to be great. And, say he wins a few playoff games and, they plays really well and all that other stuff. I mean, we're talking $55 million that you might have to put into your quarterback spot. Now, I don't know that can be your only consideration, but I do think the fact that you've got, Cam Hayward, to me, is getting older. And I would probably say he's on his last contract with the Steelers. If you wait a year and do the extension, then you can maybe balance your books a little bit better. I feel like the Steelers are in a really good spot with Alex Highsmith. If they want to keep him a long term, they probably can. But I would use the tools they have available to them to sort of stretch out the process before they have to give him a long-term deal, to see, if Cam Hayward, his money comes off the books, right? To kind of see what happens with Kenny Pickett and know, we're going to have to pay X amount of dollars for a quarterback position. There's a couple of other things that are probably going to happen too, in terms of decisions with some of the other players you have. Najee Harris, I think, is a great example. So I don't have a problem with them talking about an extension with Alex Highsmith. I wouldn't do it till after the season, though.
What has he shown you, Paul? And how do you interpret his results from last year, particularly when TJ Watt was not on the field? I think there were times where it felt like Alex Highsmith was rather invisible, but do you think that was more a function of him, or was it a function of there was nothing behind him, so it was easy for defenses to load up to stop him because they didn't have a threat coming from the other side? What has he shown you?
Well, I mean, he has shown, in my mind, he has shown me the ability to be a pretty good player when he has the help of a guy like TJ Watt, which to me, it does call into question how much money you would actually pay him. Is he replaceable by, linebacker X that could do the same things with TJ Watt on the other side? I think he's better than that. I don't think he's just kind of a guy who benefits, completely from having Watt on the other side. Similar to what, Bud Dupree. I think Bud Dupree probably, benefited greatly from that. And, we've seen not a whole lot from Bud Dupree since. I think Alex Highsmith is better. I think he's more versatile than Bud Dupree was. So I do think they should try to work out something and sign him. But I do think that it should be a little bit buyer beware, that maybe his numbers and his production is propped up by the fact that teams have to worry so much about the guy on the other side.
How do you like what the Steelers have done in addressing the depth? Because, I do think that's a component of it, Paul, because they just didn't have anything. Alex Highsmith was getting double teams. He was getting every team's best blockers every single time while TJ Watt was gone. Do you like the way the Steelers have addressed things with Nick Herbig? I think there's people that are optimistic about them. I think there's people that are concerned about his size. What's your level of optimism that we're not going to see what happened last year happen again in 2023, and that at least the drop-off if T.J. Watt does miss 2-3 games at some point won't be as bad as it was at times last year?
Well, I think that T.J. Watt is a freak. I think he's a freak of nature. I don't think they have anybody anywhere that's close to what he does. And so there's going to be a drop-off. And the thing about it is, no matter who you put there, there's not going to be somebody there that is going to draw double teams, that's going to demand the attention of the offense, that's going to have basically the entire offense predicated on, we got to stop that guy first. So, yeah, they might have upgraded a little bit. They didn't upgrade because the bottom line, if they had that guy behind T.J. Watt, he'd be playing on the other side and Highsmith would be the backup. And so to me, I look at it from the standpoint of when Watt goes out, you can do your best to try and replace what he does, but you ain't replacing him. And there's nobody that they have on that roster that they're going to sign that can do the things he can do. So to me, when you look at it that way, no matter who they put over there, that person is going to, have to just sort of be a good player that makes plays, but he's not going to be T.J. Watt. And that's going to be part of that's going to be part of the problem for the Highsmiths of the world. And even, I think we saw at times Cam Hayward, didn't, obviously struggled a little bit or whatever, because not necessarily struggle, but they were able to pay more attention to him when they didn't have to worry about Watt on the other side.
Yeah, I think the problem for me, Paul, is it wasn't just that they weren't as good as T.J. Watt, because obviously that's a bar almost no one is going to meet anywhere in football, let alone in Pittsburgh. I think the problem was they had non-entities, right? Guys that just did not do anything. I mean, I don't even remember their names, Paul. The guys they had playing opposite Alex Highsmith last year. That guy that brought in from the Jets. You know what I mean? Like they had non-entities, and I just wonder, have they done enough so that, yeah, okay, if there's going to be a drop-off, but it's the difference between like here and like maybe getting up here a little bit. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, if you can at least get to the point where the other team has to worry about you a little bit, then that would be an upgrade over what they had last year when Watt was out. But again, I feel like the drop off from Watt to whoever is second is so incredibly large that I just don't know that you can make that up. With a draft pick or with a free agent signing. I mean, to me, one thing that could help, I think their inside linebackers, at least the starters, are going to be better, and so I think that will help a little bit the Highsmiths of the world and whatnot, because I think that they, having better inside linebackers, teams will have to maybe attack the Steelers a little different and maybe not be able to load up so much on Highsmith.
Paul, I wanted to get your thoughts. We don't have to get too far into it because we did just do a whole video about it on the North Shore Drive on Monday with Christopher Carter, Ray Fittipaldo. If you haven't seen that, make sure you check that out as well. But Paul, the Ben Roethlisberger comments saying he didn't want Kenny Pickett to succeed because he didn't want people to forget about him. I kind of wrote it from the perspective, I did the Post-Gazette story for it. I wrote it from the perspective of what you and I have talked about on here before is Roethlisberger, say what you want about him, he's great TV. And right. He's better than so many of these guys that we see in the studios pulling punches all the time or just yucking it up on the set. He's honest. He doesn't pull punches. He shoots from the hip. He says what he thinks. I think that's why he loves this podcast format so much, because it's just him. There's no like CBS telling him what to say. There's no NBC telling him what to say. I thought it was refreshingly honest for him. And it's kind of what I expected to hear from him too on a certain level, Paul. I kind of don't get the outrage some people have for this situation.
Here's the thing. Ben Roethlisberger is very, very good at getting his name out there and keeping his name in headlines. I really fully 100% believe he knew exactly what he was doing when he said what he said. He knew it would cause the stir that it would cause. He knew that we would talk about it for 3 or 4 days and he would be the focal point. He knew that the Steelers were going into OTAs and that, you know what, he wanted to make sure that he was the guy that got the headlines the day before they got on the field. The other thing is, if you watch the whole thing in its entirety, I don't understand the outrage for what he said. I don't understand why anybody's upset about it, other than there are a lot of people that hate Ben. And, they think he's petty, which he is. They think he's passive aggressive, which he is. They think he's, condescending at times, which he is. But they also think he's, a guy who passes the blame sometimes and would passive aggressively blame everybody else while saying, oh, but, it's me that got to get better. All of those are fair criticisms. And there are some people that don't like that. But to me, I take every single situation differently. And it's going back to that Lamar Jackson. When, remember there was that big stink a few weeks ago where Roethlisberger basically said every team game planning for Lamar Jackson is game planning for his legs first and his arms second, which what did he say that was wrong? But of course, the Robert Griffins of the world and the defenders of Lamar Jackson, they all basically lost their minds and screamed and yelled about, him disrespecting Lamar Jackson's arm ability, and he didn't say anything wrong. And if you watch the whole clip, and it's the same thing with this. If you watch the whole clip, he says very clearly, but I came to a conclusion that, I really want to root for you. And you are the future of this team. And you know what? By the second or third game that we were watching, I found myself rooting for you really hard. Okay. But again, here's the thing about Ben. He doesn't say something like that unless it's calculated, right? He knows exactly what's going to happen when he says stuff like that it's going to go viral and more people are going to end up watching the podcast because of it. You know what I'm saying? It's going to go viral and we're going to talk about Ben. And so, he's going to find a way every so often to get his name in the headlines, to get his name, out there and to have people talking about him, because the whole point of it, what he was saying is, it wasn't his choice to quit. It wasn't his choice to be done. He still believed and probably believes he had, he could play more football and still play better than a lot of the quarterbacks in the league. And so, when it's that circumstance, guys have a hard time with it. They have a hard time when it's not their choice. And so, again, it's pretty clear he likes the limelight. He likes to be the center of discussion. And so, people take this stuff way too seriously, especially coming from him. I've dealt with him in, the media circles or whatever for a long, long time. I've observed his press conferences. I've listened to what he said. I listened to when he used to have a radio show at the Fan and everything else. He doesn't say anything that isn't 100% calculated. He doesn't, spontaneously say things, that are crazy. He knows exactly what he's saying. He knows why he's saying it. He knows the reaction he's going to get.
Yeah, I mean, and I will say I was one of those people that it drove me nuts during his career, Paul. But, there's just so many studio shows. There's just so many studio shows at this point that you never really – you never get that kind of perspective from these guys you expect to be good on television. And so it's refreshing to see him, be good at television. Paul, speaking of television, I wanted to get into Thursday Night Football. The flex scheduling has been announced. The NFL has the right to flex games into or out of prime time on Thursday night, move them up or back 3 days. It's not fan friendly, especially if you bought tickets to these events, to know that it's kind of like TBD whether the event's going to happen on the day that you bought the tickets for. And if you bought a hotel room or you bought a rental car, you did any of that to go watch a team in another city, to go watch a team in Pittsburgh. If you're coming from out of town to see a game in Pittsburgh, I mean, certainly not friendly to those people. But when I talked to Joe Starkey for our video yesterday, he doesn't care. He thinks it's good for the NFL to have better games on Thursday nights. What say you about that whole situation?
Well, now that you said Joe Starkey has that opinion, I'm going to change my opinion, because I would never want to actually agree with Joe Starkey. But here's the thing. What the NFL has basically said, and this is something we've known for a long, long time, okay? Eyes on the television set matter a lot more than people who buy tickets. Just the reality of the situation. That is how they the TV deals are decided, signed, agreed to, whatever you want to say. That's where all their money comes from. And so having a lot of people watch games is more important than worrying about season ticket holders who are upset because they had to change their hotel reservations or whatever. The tickets, for instance, for the Steelers, they're all sold for the entire season. So the bottom line, if you make it Thursday, if you make it Sunday, if you make it Monday, if you make it whatever, those tickets are all sold. So even if there's only 40,000 people that decide they're going to show up because, the schedule changed, the tickets are already sold. What you need is to ensure that every single Thursday night and every single Monday night, people are watching games. And I can tell you, I've either evolved or I've gotten old or I don't know what's going on. But Monday Night Football and Thursday Night Football and Sunday Night Football used to be must-see TV for me. I used to have to watch every one of those games no matter what. The last few years, there's just a lot of games on that I have no interest in watching because the teams are bad, right? And especially late in the season. It seemed like every single week we had either the Bears, the Commanders, there was about 3 or 4 teams that were on every single week. And it was like, I don't want to watch those teams. They're bad. They stink. So, to me, if I'm the NFL and I'm trying to maximize the audience I have, that's exactly what I'm doing.
Yeah, no, I think it makes sense. It's just, if you are a ticket buyer, it definitely stinks. Paul, want to get into baseball as well. The Pirates are running into a ton of outs. I think we have a story on postgazette.com today about that. G1 Bay, it seems like he's getting thrown out all the time now. And he's got lots of steals too. My question for you, Paul, is everyone was fired up when it was working in April. The running like crazy, running wild on teams. And then the league adjusted. They weren't going to let the Pirates steal 15 bases every series for the rest of the team. It was never going to happen. Teams were not going to let that happen. How much of this is natural, like a natural reaction, and that you're still going to believe the net positive of being aggressive on the bases is better than not, or are the Pirates putting themselves at a disadvantage? I kind of tend to be more in the first camp of this is an adjustment. They knew that this was going to happen. They want to continue to be aggressive, and they think the risk outweighs, or the benefits outweighs the risk. But people don't seem to be like that. People seem to be very upset that they're running into so many outs now.
Well, I think there's a healthy balance between the two. I mean, you don't want to become so conservative and whatnot that you're not able. I mean, this is a team that needs to generate runs. They need to manufacture runs. They need to find a way to get as many runs as they possibly can because they don't hit the ball out of the ballpark very much, right? They don't have many guys that hit the ball out of the ballpark. Sawinski had like 90 home runs in April, but for the most part, he's come back to earth. I know what's his name, Takupa, whatever his name is, hit the grand slam the other night. But for the most part, this is a team that has to go station to station to win games, to score runs. So I agree with you. They need to be aggressive, but there's a difference there's a fine line to quote Bill Cowher, there's a fine line between aggressive and stupid. And I think that, some of the base running mistakes they've made have been stupid. They've been, out of an arrogance that we're going to continue to do what we did early in April before the league adjusted, and we're going to get away with it. I think that there's a happy medium that the Pirates have to find. You can't get to the point where you're you can't get to the point where you're afraid to run. Okay? You can't get to that point. But you also can't get to a point where you're costing yourself outs. Because both problems, right, hurt a team that needs every base runner they can possibly have, right, and needs to manufacture runs. So I know it's a little bit of a cop-out, Adam. Usually I take a pretty hard stance on things. I would tell you there's a happy medium somewhere in between what you're saying, which is just keep going, balls to the wall, and what some of the Pirate fans are saying, which is just, you're costing yourself way too many outs and runs and this and that and everything, blah, blah, blah. Look, at the end of the day, you've got to be aggressive, but you've got to be smart. And I don't know that the Pirates have been both so far.
Yeah, I mean, I don't disagree that there's a happy medium, Paul, and maybe they could dial it back a little bit. I love the people who were just like, oh yeah, we love the aggression when it was working, and instantly flip the switch the moment teams start throwing us out to runners. It's like if you believed in it before, you got to believe in it to a certain extent now, don't you?
Right. If it worked before, you got to let it work now.
Right. It's just not going to work as often because that's how it works in professional sports, folks. It's not a linear thing. You say every week on this show, Paul. It's 162 games. Teams are going to figure things out, and you got to adjust to them now. And I think that's where the Pirates have to do is they have to find out what their adjustment is.
Right. They just have to adjust to now. Teams have sort of figured out how to mitigate some of the rule changes to make sure that teams can't just run wild on them. I mean, in April, it looked like, boy, Ricky Henderson's records are all going to be, his stolen base records are all going to be in jeopardy here, the way the league is now. But you knew that they were going to come back to earth at some point. And that's what's happened. So to me, I just feel like, that is where you look at it and say, all right, if you're the Pirates, you still want to be aggressive. You still want to take those shots. You still want to try and maximize guys on base and all the other stuff that you're doing. But you also want to make sure that you're, smart in the way that you do it.
Paul, I want to ask you about Christopher Morel, the sensation the Cubs brought up. He has, I believe, 9 home runs in 12 games. He is tearing things up. He is everything every Pirates fan thinks every Pirates prospect is when they come up, and then they're not. Even O'Neal Cruz, who I think there were a lot of good things with O'Neal Cruz last season, but he certainly was not this. And we were sold this, right? How frustrating is it that the Pirates intentionally were terrible for 3 years, and who has the sensation coming up in the minor leagues? It's still the Cubs. It's not the Pirates. They don't have that guy that's coming in ready to go, ready to make an impact. I don't think he's going to stay on this pace, obviously, because he'd set the home run record over if he does. But I think, generally speaking, the Pirates do not get this impact from the minor leagues in the Ben Cherington era. These guys come up, they struggle for a period of time, and maybe, like Mitch Keller, they figure things out. Maybe like Rodolfo Castro, I put him in that bucket of guys who struggled at times, but then have seemed to start to put it together. But they certainly didn't come up and make this immediate impact and immediately make the team better the way Morel is for the Cubs right now. How frustrating is that?
I would say this, as I always say, it's a long haul sport. His immediate impact is impressive. But let's talk in August about it and see where he's at in August. Because here's the thing, the league is going to punch back, just like we talked about with the running. The league is going to, as Clint Hurdle said, the league is going to punch back. And that's what happens. They're going to adjust. Pitchers are going to, study him more. Pitchers are going to see, his tendencies more. You're probably going to have a situation of where, they are looking into all of the things that he does well and doesn't do well. So let's see what happens when there's adjustment. Now, that being said, the kid has talent, and he obviously has a lot of talent. And I do believe he's going to be an impact player. There's no question about it. I can't think of, who is the last really true, is McCutchen the last true impact, star kind of player that the Pirates have brought up out of their system?
Maybe you could say Marte. You think back to he hit the home run on the first pitch he saw.
Yeah.
So I think you could maybe put Marte in that category. Maybe Garrett Cole.
Garrett Cole. I forgot about him. Yeah,
but that's still 10 years ago, Paul. Like that's still a decade.
Yes.
And none of them are people that came out of this Cherington regime. And he was hired as, I'm a development genius. I'm going to produce these guys that are coming. We're going to have impact players, and we haven't seen that from his regime. The impact on this year's team, the guys who've made this team good are veterans that they brought in from the outside. They're not young guys that we've been sold.
That's the frustration. That's where the frustration comes. When you have, some of these wins where Rich Hill is on the mound, McCutchen or Santana gets the big hit, or even Connor Joe gets the big hit. You're like, well, that's great, but those guys are not the guys we're supposed to be, relying on now. The guy that really concerns me is Cabrian Hayes. I'm resigned. I heard the other day, who was it? Bob Walker, maybe Neil Walker, one of those guys was talking about how, he's going to develop power. I just think he's what he is. I also think he's a little bit of a China doll, and he's a guy that's probably going to have these stints on the DL every single year where, he's got, some kind of soft tissue problem or his wrist is banged up or whatever. I'm worried that he's probably a guy that is never going to be what they thought he was going to be when they drafted him. O'Neal,
here's my concern, Paul, is maybe he will develop power at some point. But what? We're 3 years into this. We're in year 4 of him being on this team. I'm going to count 2020, even though we probably shouldn't. It shouldn't take this long. If you're a development, you know what I mean? Like our whole conception of the Pirates being a competitive entity is built on these guys coming from the minors and making impacts. And if it takes 3 years, 4 years, 5 years for Brian Hayes to figure it out at the plate, what are we doing?
Yeah, that's never good. And I'm going to tell you, O'Neal Cruz, for all of the the wow factor whenever he hit the ball 10 miles and all the other stuff, he has a long way to go to be a superstar player.
He has holes
in a lot of ways. He's got some holes in his game, that he's got some holes in his swing. I mean, it's great that you can hit the ball onto a barge from time to time. It's great that you throw the ball 297 miles an hour or whatever it is from shortstop to first. But he's got to get much better at the routine, the mundane, every single day, the consistency aspect of it. And I, have to see evidence that that's going to happen because of what you're saying. This regime and even the regime right before it doesn't seem to develop players very well. And that's never a good thing. Never ever. It's interesting. Real quick as an aside, somebody in my mailbag asked, should the Pirates have given Garrett Cole a long-term deal? And I said yes, from the standpoint of because I guess he just had 2,000 strikeout or something. I said yes, from the standpoint of it would have given them a true ace for the last what's it been now, 7 years, 6 years, however long it's been since he's gone, right? Yes, except for. The problem is they couldn't have afforded anybody else, so you basically have an elite pitcher on a team that wins 50 games.
Well, they were trying to get him, but Paul, they tried to get him to induce ground balls. Like that's what they were trying to do with that guy. Like I don't think he ever would have been that pitcher here. That's not what they were trying to do.
I forgot all about that. Pitch to contact. I forgot all about that.
Right. Yeah. So that's frustrating to me is that it just doesn't feel like the Pirates are going to get that kind of impact. And I know this guy's not going to keep hitting like this, but structurally the Pirates it doesn't seem like that happens for them. It's like
and the Cubs have the money to make sure that guy's a pain in the Pirates' ass for 12 or 13 years.
Exactly. Paul, I'm going to get you out of here on this. You wrote about Deion Sanders and what he's doing at Colorado. Basically churning out almost the entire roster through the transfer portal, sending guys on their way. And I think you have concern about, what that says for college sports. My question for you is do you think that this is an exception to the rule and the Colorado, I read in a couple places how dreadful Colorado really was and how there's probably a lot of guys on that roster specifically that did not belong in a Power 5 conference. Are you worried that this is going to become a trend, or is this something that's limited to Colorado is just so bad?
I hope it's not a trend. It's not good for college football. Listen, Adam, I'm all for students and student athletes being able to move around as much as they want to move around or whatever, the freedom thing. I'm okay with that. I'm not one of these guys. You know me. I'm not one of these guys. Oh, I hate the transfer portal. I hate NIL. I hate what's happening. I mean, these are things that naturally had to happen, right? And I like the fact now that coaches can't hold guys hostage. But the unintended consequence is what's going on in Colorado, where coaches are either emboldened and now roles actually allow them in their first year to basically just cut guys. And I don't think that's good. These are student athletes. At the end of the day, I get it. I understand it. There's money involved. Coaches make money. There's money in millions in the TV, and they got NIL money now. And so Jordan Addison's of the world make $3 million. I get it. I get how it's a business and all that other stuff. At the end of the day, allegedly, these are institutions of higher learning, and these are still student athletes. And so it shouldn't just become the wild, wild west like the NFL, because that's what the NFL is for. That's a professional league that's designed to be a professional league. So I'm not a one of these old fogey purist guys. I have no problem with the NIL. I think that, you know what? The worst idea I've ever heard, as an aside, is that the House of Representatives wants to get in. They want to get involved in the NIL stuff. That's terrible. I like the fact that it's market driven. If somebody wants to pay somebody, a lot of money, that's fine. I have no problem with transfer, but turning over 70 guys on your roster. Now, 18 of them, I think, graduated or whatever. So it's really more like 52 or 53, but still, a lot of those 52, 53 are guys you told to leave. I just don't think that's the right approach. I mean, I feel like, to me, that rule was put in place. So if a first-year coach comes in, right, and say there's limited scholarships available because of a number of different reasons, he can at least try and recruit a class by maybe, shaving a few guys off the bottom of the roster and helping them find another place. It was never meant to be what's going on here. Now, will it become a trend? Probably not, because I don't know that anybody else out there has the cachet that Deion Sanders does to where he feels like, hey, I legitimately can go get 50 guys out of the transfer portal. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. I think a lot of coaches understand it's a hard thing to do. Here's the other thing. It's a hard thing to do to basically go get 50 guys and then have them gel and become a team and go out and win games. To me, I would set the over-under at Colorado for wins at like 5. And I think I think Colorado fans would jump at that, Paul. Right. And they think that's a huge success and that made it worth it, right? Right. But my point is, I think he could have achieved that without all this other nonsense, right? Shave off, 5 to 10 guys, bring in 5 to 10. Because let's face it, the difference between going 1-11 and for 1-11 and 5-7, in some respects, is probably 5 to 8 players. You get a better quarterback, a better receiver, a couple better linemen, and all of a sudden, those games against bad teams, guess what? You win a few of those games, which I think they'll do this year. It won't shock me if they're 4-8, and everybody will be saying, well, Deion Sanders, he promised a lot and he didn't deliver a whole lot. But again, it's really difficult to do, piece together 70 guys and get them to become a functional team. Especially since a lot of them won't even get on campus until mid-June. Yeah, I think it's going to be, at the very least, it's an interesting experiment. I think the whole college football world is watching. I agree with you, Paul. I don't like the precedent of it, but I also think, that it's unbelievable how bad that program was, and I think that's a contributing factor that I think makes the situation, between the coach and how bad the program was. I do think it's unique. Yeah, absolutely. It is unique, but again, if it works, watch out. Every first year coach coming in the play is going to try and do the same thing. All right, Paul. Well, that's all I got for you this week. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Paul, you got to get down to the Pirate game. Any final thoughts? No, beat them Buccos, right? Beat them Buccos. I don't know. We'll see. Here's the thing I look forward to when I go to PNC Park is eating and drinking. Well, you enjoy that, Paul, and we will talk to you again next week. We'll have, I'm sure, plenty more to dig through from Steelers OTAs and such. So enjoy, and I'll talk to you soon. All right, we'll see you.
Thank you for checking out this content from Post-Gazette Sports. If you liked the video, please like it and subscribe to our YouTube channel. If you enjoyed it on Apple Podcasts, please rate us 5 stars on Apple Podcasts. For 6 months of digital access to post-gazette.com for just $6, click the link down in the description.